What a very entertaining and interesting weekend of college football. No better place to start than with the teams that deserve the "you've got to be kidding me" for this week, and that is Wisconsin and Texas. Both teams had their blatant quackery exposed. Both teams were exposed as frauds, plain and simple. Wisconsin, year in, year out, seems to be ranked in the top 10 in the preseason. Last year, they lost to BYU. This year, they lose to, wait for it, Illinois. Illinois? Are you kidding me? You expect me to believe that you can compete for a Big Ten title and actually hang around in Columbus next week, but you can't even beat Illinois? I'm going to get more to Illinois later, but that's a huge win for Lovie Smith. Congratulations to him. Great win. Maybe it's a turning point for the program. Now, Illinois last week was down 28-0 to Michigan and then came back to make it 28-25 before Michigan got some separation. So I'm not entirely sure why Wisconsin didn't see that and go, maybe we should ignore Ohio State for a minute and focus on this game. Telling you, ranking Wisconsin in the top 10 is starting to become just straight out quackery. They don't deserve it. I think everyone's been too blind about how good Jonathan Taylor is to realize that, yeah, Wisconsin does have some weaknesses. Some of the coaching decisions down the stretch, like why were you throwing the ball up by 2 with like under 2 minutes left? Like 2.5 minutes left. That makes no sense at all. It was a poorly thrown ball and it got intercepted and Illinois won. Moving on to the other fraud that got exposed, albeit in a win, Texas. Now, for some weird reason, Kansas actually gives Texas trouble most of the times that they play. It's really weird. I don't know why it happens. And I do think Les Miles and Kansas, not this year, of course, but I think Les Miles will turn Kansas into at least a bowl team, 6-7 wins on a consistent basis in the future, which for Kansas football is really good. They will never be what they were when Mark Mangino was the coach. I don't think they'll ever have a season quite like they did in 2007 with Todd Reesing, but Carter Stanley can play. I think it's some of Carter Stanley's kind of decent. Kansas has some decent receivers, and they also have Puka, but Texas defense got exposed. There's no other way around it. Again, no disrespect intended to Kansas here, but you can't give up 48 to Kansas and call yourself a ranked team. A couple weeks ago, we were all making arguments about why Texas A&M shouldn't be ranked. Those arguments apply to Texas. They will be ranked, but they shouldn't be. I don't have them in my top 25 this week. And to be honest with you, this is a Texas team that's already lost to Oklahoma, already lost to LSU. Those games at Baylor and at Iowa State don't look as kind of automatic as they once did. This is a Texas team that could easily finish 8-4, potentially even 7-5, because TCU, as bad as they've looked recently, is not a guaranteed win on the road for Texas. This is a Texas team that had such high hopes to start the year, but with their defense, 7-5 or 8-4 is a legitimate possibility for this Texas team. Michigan fought valiantly in the second half. They got behind 21-0. Unlike Harbaugh teams of the past, they actually kind of fought back instead of just let themselves get ran over. But at the end of the day, it is another loss as an underdog in a big-time road game for Jim Harbaugh in Michigan. You've got to wonder when they're going to win one of those. You've got to wonder. Penn State's a great team, but Michigan has got, if you're going to be the coach at Michigan, you've got to be able to at least win a couple of those games. Jim Harbaugh's only road win against a ranked team was last year against Michigan State, and Michigan State finished the season like 6-7 or 7-6. Now, I think Harbaugh with the second half kind of took I take back what I said about Harbaugh being on the hot seat only because that second half was impressive and they were a dropped touchdown away from going to overtime, and who knows what might have happened. So I think Harbaugh, even in a loss, got himself an extra year, but that could change. That could change. If they don't beat Notre Dame this week, he could be right back on the hot seat. Got a big game, but it's at home, it's at night. Michigan Stadium at night, over the last few years that they've started playing night games there, has become a really tough place to play. Notre Dame is the better team, but I'm going to give Michigan the edge because it's at home. But if they lose, Harbaugh's back in a tough position. Ohio State rolled again. Ohio State, I tweeted this somewhat joking after Wisconsin's loss to Illinois, but like in all seriousness, Wisconsin could legitimately beat Wisconsin by 25 or 30. I mean, they were able to beat a really good Wisconsin team in the Big Ten Championship a few years ago, 59-0 with their third string quarterback. Keep that in mind. Obviously, Cardale Jones isn't there anymore. It's a different coach, obviously, but worth noting, this one's in Columbus. I can see this game being very lopsided now. Would not have said that last week, but Ohio State doesn't keep things close with teams that lose to Illinois. And the ACC Coastal, well, this week was about as the epitome of the ACC Coastal. Miami thought they had turned a corner last week. Turns out Miami is one of those teams that they'll play up to their competition when they're playing a decent team, but they'll also play down to their competition. And they have a good win against Virginia, but they also have a terrible loss to Georgia Tech, who might be the worst team in the ACC. Again, another thing I tweeted as a joke, Georgia Tech going on a winning streak and somehow winning the Coastal would be the most ACC Coastal thing ever. Ever. Not saying it's going to happen. It's probably not. Heck, it most likely won't. But that'd be hilarious. Virginia got back on the right track. I was very pleased with what I saw in a big win over Duke. As good as our defense had been, Virginia's defense had really struggled to take the ball away, to create turnovers and help the offense. But we came into that game forcing 5 turnovers all season, while the defense forced 5 turnovers in the game. Some of it's Duke when it's obviously, but Virginia's offense finally was able to punch it in the red zone. The red zone woes for at least that game were not really present except for an early red zone turnover on a interesting decision made by Bryce Perkins. But that was the best I think that Virginia's offense has looked, and I think the best Virginia has looked as a team all year as far as playing complementary football goes. Another game in the ACC Coastal, I actually just saw something today. Apparently the ACC listed the North Carolina Virginia Tech start time on their website as all day. The game was listed as instead of being listed as starting at noon, instead of noon or 3:30, which is when it actually started, it was listed as all day. Well, they weren't exactly wrong. We finally got to see the new overtime rules where you go to 5 overtimes and you just do a 2-point conversion off. It was a wild game. Unfortunately, it was probably a game that North Carolina really needed to win, because now they're 3-4. They're playing a Duke team next week that's going to be pissed off. After that, they play Virginia, who's been a little Jekyll and Hyde, But if the Virginia team that showed up Saturday shows up against North Carolina, I really don't see how they win. Then they play Pitt, who's really playing good football right now, or about as good of football as you can play in the ACC Coastal anyway. You know, it looked a week ago like it was a sure thing that North Carolina makes a bowl game. The only game on North Carolina's schedule the rest of the way that they're definitely going to win is Mercer. They'll probably beat NC State because, good Lord, Dave Doran's team is just awful this year. But it's a possibility right now that North Carolina is looking at 4-8 or 5-7. They're going to need to pull an upset to get to 6. They're going to need to win a game on the road to get to 6. And so far in this first year of the Mac Brown experiment, they've kind of struggled on the road. North Carolina has looked like different teams when they're playing at home versus when they're playing on the road. It was a similar issue that Virginia's kind of had as well, and we kind of still do to an extent, in that we still kind of struggle in conference road games. North Carolina is going the same way right now, and they're going to need to win one if they want to get to a bowl game. It looked like Virginia Tech was going to be that one. That is a tough loss for North Carolina, but I'll say this. I don't think anybody, and if they did, I don't know what they're thinking, doubted Mac Brown's ability to recruit. North Carolina could make a case for being the Coastal favorite, if not next year, most certainly the year after that. It may not be next year, but North Carolina will be Mac Brown is recruiting to the point where North Carolina should, and I say should because it's the ACC Coastal where weird things happen, be the favorite potentially next year, and potentially even, this might be a stretch, but they maybe not next year, but the year after that, they could be preseason top 25, and North Carolina is a team to keep an eye on down the stretch. Mac Brown is getting a lot of talent to go to Chapel Hill, and that is huge for them. Illinois may have finally turned the corner. They have been a little bit competitive the last maybe year or two. They were very competitive against Michigan last week, as I mentioned. Got a big win over Wisconsin this week. That could be huge. We'll see where Lovie Smith and the Fighting Illini go from there. Speaking of a program that is on the rise, what a turnaround Matt Rule has orchestrated at Baylor. Baylor right now is my pick to play Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game, and because of the way the Sugar Bowl works, Oklahoma will be in the playoff. Baylor's going to make the Sugar Bowl. Baylor, incredibly, is very likely to make a New Year's Six bowl game right now. Matt Rule did this at Temple. He made Temple a legitimate program. He's doing it at Baylor too. Matt Rule has as good of a case as anybody for National Coach of the Year right now, as does Sonny Dykes, who is not far away at SMU, who's also got a team after Boise State's loss last night that's looking at a New Year's Six. A lot of interesting developments in this past weekend in college football should set up for a great next week of college football.